I'm Kyla. Welcome to number 2 in our Service Workers series. Today I'm going to talk about low back pain because that's definitely a common complaint among bartenders, servers, other service workers, people who spend a lot of time on their feet. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different things that tend to contribute to back pain and then what we can do about it. So first thing we're going to talk about is posture, because that and strength are the two things that tend to be the most contributing to low back pain. So stand up with me and pretend for a minute that you're standing at your speed rack mixing drinks, or you're at the POS entering an order, or whatever you might do where you're kind of standing and you're thinking about what you're doing and you're not necessarily thinking about your body position. How are you standing? I often see this, and I certainly used to be guilty of this. I struggled with low back pain for a really, really long time. So everything I'm going to tell you today are things that I did for myself and have pretty much gotten rid of my low back pain. So if you're letting your knees lock and letting your hips shift forward, look what happens to my low back. It gets pretty arched there. And that's a lot of compression and strain on the low back. So that's part of what's going to contribute to low back pain. And one of the reasons, well, a couple of the reasons that we tend to end up in this posture is that our core is either not strong enough or not firing properly. Our glutes are not working to support us, and basically this is how we can stand while resting on our bones and not making our muscles do anything at all. So training the right muscle patterns, training the right muscles to turn on, and getting them strong enough to do their jobs will make us able to stand with good posture, using our muscles to support that with very little effort. But when you've gotten in a pattern of moving your body in a certain way, it takes time and effort to change that. So this is not something that's going to change overnight, but it's definitely something that I encourage you to start paying attention to. The other thing, aside from kind of getting this big curve in the back, is that people sometimes really squeeze their butts and tuck their tailbone under, and that also is not going to be good loading in the body and end up in strain over time. So the first thing we can think about when we're thinking about good posture, I don't mean shoulders back, chest lifted. That's really extreme and tends to result in more tension and discomfort. So to start with, I just like to think about, imagine that from your pubic bone here in the front to the crown of your head, which is kind of, towards the back. So we're not talking top here, we're talking back top of the head, if that makes sense. And so if you had a string that was coming from here to here, and somebody just kind of pulled up on it, and you thought about lengthening through that plane, what happens to your body when you do that? See, all I did was thinking about lengthen up through the crown of my head, think about my pubic bone lifting just a little bit, and that changed my posture pretty significantly just on its own. So generally speaking, what we want to see is that the ear is stacked over the shoulder, is stacked over the hip, is stacked over the elbow. So that's a really good place just to start to figure out what should that good posture look like. The next thing you can think about is if you really scrunch your shoulders way up and then let them drop. That's about where you want them. You don't want them pressed down, you don't want them coming up by your ears, you don't really want them coming way back. You just want them in a comfortable place. And then we want to think about where our hips are at. So I really don't want my hips over my toes. This in particular causes a lot of strain on the low back, on the core. It makes it really hard for those core muscles to fire and support our back. So it's really, really important and helpful to think about keeping your hip bone right over your ankles. And that doesn't mean that your weight is so far back on your heels that you feel like you're gonna fall over, although it might feel a little bit that way at first if you're used to being way forward, but really your weight should be pretty centered in your foot. So not way forward on the toes, not way back on the heels, but centered. So kind of in the middle of my foot is where I'm thinking about having my weight supported. So we're gonna go down to the feet for a minute. And this is the part where I get a lot of groans, but one of the big contributors to this sort of posture is heeled shoes. And I see a lot of people in short heels. A lot of people think that they're wearing flat shoes, but they're not, because most flat shoes actually do have a little bit of a heel lift. And so what happens when you have your heel lifted is that if I were to keep my body flat and then I lifted my heels, this is what happens to my body. And then to fix that, I have to do this. And here's that posture that we were just talking about. So it's really hard not to do this in your body if you're wearing heels, because your body has to compensate for that lift somewhere. So wearing as flat of shoes as possible when you work is really, really, really helpful for reducing low back pain. Even tennis shoes have a little bit of a lift, and you have to specifically seek out zero drop or no lift shoes. And that's not something that you want to go right to if you've been wearing heels. But it's something to maybe think about working down to. So what I really encourage you to do is when you're at home, like now is an excellent time to be working on this. If you can be barefoot at home, think about spreading your toes out, giving them plenty of room to move, because that is a big part of our support and balance system at the bottom. And then think about pressing your big toe into the floor so that your arches lift. If you already have a pretty good arch, this is probably not an issue for you, but a lot of people, like me, tend to have kind of flat arches. The ankles collapse in, and that's going to affect everything above. So as much as you can when you're home, be barefoot. Think about pressing your big toe into the floor and lifting that arch, and that'll start to train not only the muscles in the arch to get stronger, but just kind of that good general alignment from your feet up. All right, so now we're going to move on to the core, because the core muscles are a really, really, really big player when it comes to low back discomfort and pain, because these are the muscles that are supposed to be holding us up, but often we will just kind of dump and put a lot of that strain into our back instead if our core isn't working properly. I cannot talk about core function and strength without talking about breathing pattern. How we breathe directly impacts how a lot of things in our body, in particular the core, fire and are able to get stronger. So I'm not going to go way in depth on that because it's a really big topic, but just kind of as a general overview, it's really, really helpful not only for your low back strength and good core support, but also to help relieve that neck and upper back tightness, to get out of the shallow chest breathing, and to get into good diaphragmatic expansion, which sends the breath down. So ideally, when we inhale, you can put your hands on your ribs here with me. When you inhale, your ribs should expand out to the side and to the back. And then as your diaphragm flattens down, that breath should come down. So it's not like a big belly breath, but it's going into the ribs, a little bit into the belly, all the way down into the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor and the core are connected and very related, so we can't really talk about one without the other. Pelvic floor muscles are also our deep hip rotator muscles. So anything that involves this area of the body, the pelvic floor is connected to all of that, and so we can't forget those muscles because they're attached. So inhale into your ribs. Think about that breath coming all the way down to the bottom of your abdominal canister here, and then when you exhale, think about that lifting up, your diaphragm lifts, and your ribs come together. If you want more information on breathing, it's in some of my other videos, and you can always contact me. I do one-on-one virtual sessions, so we can certainly dive a lot more into the breathing, but I'm just going to really encourage you to start thinking about, where is your breath going? Is it going up into your chest, or is it going down into your ribs and all the way down to the pelvic floor? And up. All right, so next I'm going to show you my favorite core exercise to start with, and it is not crunches, because we're not trying to train those six-pack muscles, we're trying to train those deep core stabilizers. So our transverse abdominis, it wraps around like a corset and helps stabilize us, and it should know how to turn on and be able to support us and hold us up just in standing all the time. So that's the muscle that we really want to train, so that we can be standing and moving around and doing our jobs and being on our feet for hours and not have back pain. So let's see if you can see me here. So this is called a dead bug. And the easiest version is on the wall. So you don't want your hips right on your knees. You want them a little further away so that you have a little space to lift your leg off the wall. So we want to do a nice inhale in for these. So inhale, ribs expand, pressure comes all the way down. Exhale out through your mouth. You should feel that transverse abdominis muscle kind of tighten and feel your low belly scoop in a little bit. And then you're going to hold that while you lift one leg off the wall and keep it engaged and scooped in while you lower it down. And the challenge of this is that you're trying to move your leg without your hips shifting side to side at all, and without pushing into the opposite foot in order to lift your leg off the floor. So inhale in, exhale out. Here. See that low belly? Scoop in, and then you're going to hold that while you lift. And especially think about it when you lower, because that's when it gets the hardest to control it on the lowering, and you really don't want to let this pooch out. So to start with, I recommend taking a breath in between each one, and you don't have to lift very far. This doesn't have to be a big move. Lift, lower. Good. So if the wall's feeling, not too terribly difficult, then the next step would be to come away from the wall and put your feet flat on the floor. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. So good inhale in, so we can get a good exhale out and a good core contraction. And then I'm just going to lift my leg a little and really keep that core engaged until my foot is all the way back down on the floor. I'm being really careful that I'm not pressing into my opposite foot to help it lift. And lower. One more. Good. And then once that feels pretty comfortable, when you kind of redo your brace every time, then you can work on holding that brace while you breathe into the ribs. This is where that rib expansion comes in handy, because you want to be able to keep this really strong and engaged while you're bringing in air. So you really want to be able to expand through the side and back of your ribs. And then you can just keep alternating without having to stop to take a breath. As long as you're able to really keep that low belly scooped in and not let it pooch out. If it pooches out, then you need to take a pause, reset. Great. So there are a number of ways that we can progress those and make them harder, but that's a really, really good place to start. I promise you, if you practice these most days, it will significantly improve your low back pain. So now I'm going to show you a couple stretches for the low back, and then we'll go to a kind of low back and glute strengthening exercise. So to start with, I'm just going to scoot all the way up to a wall, lay on my side so my butt's right against the wall, and then I can just rotate up really easily without having to scooch very far. So I'm going to have my feet shoulder width apart, and then I'm going to try to bring the inside of my foot closer to me and the outside further away. So I'm kind of trying to point the bottoms of my feet towards each other. Then I'm going to rotate my entire leg all the way from my hip inwards. So I have the inside of my feet pulling towards me, but also my toes are going to go in towards each other. From here, I'm going to do just a very slight lift and lengthening through my neck and my spine. So if you have some hair here or ponytail, a really good way to kind of find that position is to grab and pull it up this way, because we're really trying to make the back of the neck really long, and we're not trying to lift the head up, we're just trying to reach the crown of the head that direction towards the wall. So it's just barely lifted. And then my arms are just going to go straight up overhead. I'm going to pull my fingers back with my fingers really straight and rotate them out. So this is my position. Once I'm here, I'm going to think about reaching through my heels toward the ceiling while I reach my sacrum, reach my butt towards the floor. And then I'm also thinking about reaching really long through the top of my head and through the palms of my hands towards the wall behind me. So I'm kind of getting a stretch this direction and this direction, and that really helps to get into that low back. And then you keep reaching. This should be a pretty intense, active stretch. You can hold that for up to 60 seconds and then relax. So you should feel that pretty low in your low back. From here, you might have to scoot out a little bit from the wall depending on your flexibility. But for this one, you're gonna bend one knee, put your foot against the wall, lift your hips up so that you can cross your other leg over it. So you're kind of in this figure 4 position. And then try to keep your hips square so that they're not really shifted side to side. See if you can lower down. And you should feel this stretch through the back side of the hip of the bent knee. So for those of us who tend to be glute clenchers, for those of us who tend to have tight, deep hip rotators like the piriformis muscle, this can be kind of intense, but it's really important to get those muscles to release and relax, because that tension is going to affect our low back as well. Breathe. find you're able to go a little lower as you breathe through a few of those. And then we're gonna switch. So to switch, gonna press into this foot in the wall to lift back up, switch sides. Think about pushing this knee away towards the wall, keeping the hips really level, and then just lower slowly as far as you can. And breathe. Good. One side is often more or less tight than the other, so that's pretty common. You might find one is pretty uncomfortable and the other one's not so bad, or they might both be pretty tight. It just depends on your body. To come back out, I do suggest lifting your hips up a bit so you can uncross and then come out. All right, so now let's talk about actually strengthening the low back and the glutes to help give us a little bit more support. One of my favorite exercises for this is called a Romanian deadlift. You may or may not be familiar with deadlifts. I'm going to use a couple kettlebells, but you certainly don't have to have weights to do this. You can grab any sort of weighted item, a couple jugs of water, you know, whatever you've got around. It doesn't have to be a weight. So for these, first you want to have your hips, or your feet about hip width apart, so about here, and you're just going to have whatever weighted item you have in front of you. It doesn't even have to be two things necessarily. It could be one larger item that you can hold on to with two hands. So I'm going to take a nice, first I'm going to think about getting my nice upright posture. So I'm going to think about that string connecting from my pubic bone through the crown of my head and lift so that everything is pretty well stacked and supported. And I'm going to take an inhale in, blow it out to get those core muscles engaged that we were practicing in the dead bug. And then I'm going to think about keeping my low back pretty flat. I don't want it to curve as I move. And I'm just going to think about sending my hips back behind me while I lower the weight. And I'm just going to go until I feel a stretch in my hamstrings, and then I'm going to come up quickly and squeeze my glutes. So lower back, and I really want my knees to not go anywhere. They shouldn't go forward at all. They're just going to bend in order to let my hips go behind me. So you might even think about, there's a chair way back there that you're trying to find so that you can sit on it, and then come up quickly, squeeze. Lower, slowly, squeeze. Check back in with your upper body, make sure that your spine is staying really straight and long. Don't want to if you let your back arch here, your low back is really not going to be happy with that. So really try to think about making your low back pretty flat. Just reaching those hips out behind you. All right, stop. I will also show you how you can do this with the resistance bands and a way that you can do them without any weight at all. If you have a resistance band, depending on the type that you have, if you just have a regular band with an end on each side, you can just stand on it. How much slack you leave will depend on how strong your resistance band is. But if you keep a little less slack in the middle, you want to make sure that you have enough to pull. suggest you put that under the balls of your feet, because under the arches it's just going to move. So you're just going to do that same motion while holding onto the band. If you have a circular band, if it's a bigger one, you can just kind of double it up. I'll do this one from the side. Stand on it, and you can either stand on the ends like I did with the other one, or you can just kind of spread your feet a little bit wider to give it some tension, and then really in that nice flat back. Squeeze the glutes at the top. Just like that. The other way to do these, if you have a resistance band that I really like, you do need a circular band for this, but if you have something that you can anchor it to, you can get inside your band, and this really helps with getting that good hip hinge motion. So you just kind of walk out until you feel it resisting you a little bit, so it's trying to pull you back, and then you can do your deadlift this way. So the band will kind of pull your hips back where they need to go, and then up and squeeze. So, last but not least, if you don't really have anything that you can hold on to or lift, the way that we can make these a body weight exercise, you can always start just doing this with your arms hanging down, just to kind of get the feel for the direction of the motion. But this isn't going to load it very much, and we do generally want some resistance in order to get stronger, which is the whole point. So to make this a little bit harder, we have to make ourselves longer. So if you bring your arms right up next to your ears, nice and straight, and then you have to really think even more about keeping your back really straight and flat while you do this, but you're just going to do that same motion where you send your hips back, 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 and up. So whatever equipment or not that you have available, I would love to see you give those a try and see how that goes for you. Deadlifts are one of my favorite exercises because they not only work the glutes and hamstrings, they work your low back, and they also work your core. So bonus for one exercise, hitting all those really important things. The other exercise that can be really helpful, just in kind of learning how to properly support your low back with your core, is a squat. So we want to start always with a good inhale and a good exhale, because that allows us to get really good core engagement. And then you're going to want to hold those core muscles while you squat down. And again, I'm thinking about keeping my low back really flat. And press up. And see how low can you go in your squat without letting your low back arch, and while keeping your core really strong and engaged. Also, do make sure that you're thinking about what we talked about earlier with the feet and the big toe. So think about pressing your big toe into the floor the whole time you're doing these, because that will help lift your arch, and it sends a message up the kinetic chain all the way to your core and helps your core to stay on, which is fascinating but cool. really great way just to kind of train what's going on between your core and your low back to really help it be well supported when you're standing and doing other things, because that's really the biggest key to getting your low back happier, is to get those core muscles firing more and stronger so that they can support you. The challenge with this is that doing a couple exercises here and there is not going to get rid of your back pain by itself. This has to become a new way that you live in your body. So I really encourage you, as you're home and you're brushing your teeth or you're washing dishes at the sink, pay attention to what you're doing with your body. Are you letting yourself settle into this extended locked knees, pelvis forward, low back arch position? Are you doing a lot of glute clenching to try to support yourself rather than using your abs? So just start trying to pay attention to that and see, can you notice throughout the day, if you're not in good posture, can you adjust that and just take a minute to be like, oh, lift tall, get my hips over my heels. And the more you can do that in your daily life, the faster you'll be able to correct those patterns that are contributing to your low back pain, and the faster that it will get better. So I would love for you to try these things. Do let me know if you have any questions. I know this is a lot more talking and a little less workout than the last one, but getting into the low back and the core is a little bit more complicated than just we're going to strengthen the shoulders and the back. But there are a couple exercises there for you to try, so please let me know if you have any questions, and let me know if you try it and it helps. I hope you'll join us next week. I'm doing these every Tuesday, just kind of focusing on pains and discomforts and physical issues that us service workers tend to encounter. So we're going to move a little further down the body, probably talk a little bit more about calves and feet and plantar fasciitis and things that we can do to help with that. So have a good one, and thanks for joining me.